We want to have the ability to take a quadratic equation that is not a perfect square and rewrite it as a perfect square, because we know from example that if it is a perfect square, it's very easy to factor, and then it's very easy to solve for the x-intercepts. And the way we do that is what's called completing the square. So if you think of a quadratic equation in standard form, that's ax squared plus bx plus c. When we complete the square, this a value is always going to equal 1. So really we are going to be dealing with x squared plus bx plus c. To do the process of completing the square, you're only going to focus on these first two terms. Alright. So for example, if I have x squared plus bx, you have to be able to take some number and add it on the end of this to make it a perfect square. And that number that you add is the b, the middle number, divided by 2 squared. So here's another example, or just a continuation of this. If I have x squared plus bx and I want to make this into a perfect square trinomial, I take the b value, I divide it by 2, and I square it, and then these three terms will form a perfect square trinomial. And again, when you factor it, you take the square root of the first term, that gives you x. Take the square root of the third term, that gives you b over 2. It factors down to x plus b over 2, x plus b over 2. Well, the factors are the same. That gives you your perfect square trinomial. So let's look at an example of this really quick. Let's say I have x squared plus 10x. And I want to add a number on the end that will make this a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, our little formula up here says take the b value, which is always the number in front of the x. So my b value is 10, so b equals 10. And take that b value and divide it by 2. So I'm going to take my 10, I divide it by 2, I get 5. And then it says take that number, this b divided by 2, and square it. So if I take 5 and I square it, I get 25, and I'm going to add it to the end of this expression. And what I'm left with here is a perfect square trinomial. And you can do the test on it to see. Take the square root of the first term, that gives you x. Square root of the last term gives you 5. In the middle, I should have 2 times x times 5. Well, 2 times x is 2x, times 5 is 10x. And you'll notice I have that in the middle. So it is a perfect square trinomial, and I can factor it to x plus whatever b divided by 2 was, which was 5. And then that's squared, and it's factored. Let's look at another example. Let's say I have x squared plus 30x, and I want to make this a perfect square trinomial. Actually, let's just change it to 20 in the middle, 20x. So to make this a perfect square, I take the b value, which in this case is 20. Then I divide it by 2, which gives me 10. And then I take that b divided by 2 and I square it. So 10 squared is 100, and I add that onto the very end, and I've got a perfect square trinomial. Again, you can do the little test real quick. You should have square root of x squared is x, square root of 100 is 10. In the middle, I should have 2 times 10 times x, which 2 times 10 is 20, times x is 20x, which is right there. So this will factor down to x, 10 squared, and then whatever the sign is, the first one, which is plus. So I've got a perfect square trinomial. So in order to take something and make it a perfect square trinomial, you take the b value, you divide it by 2, and you square it, add it on to the end, and you've got a perfect square trinomial that you can factor and solve.